Would love to welcome our friend Jon Bock, who is VP at NetApp, working with both Spot and Cloud Checker. Is that right, John? You're across both?
Yes,
Perfect.
We're bringing those two together because there's a lot of commonality across those. So yes.
They are. They are also an oddly good fit together, I hear. So yeah, we'd love to. John recently joined Spot. They were one of the large incumbent platforms in the space who are now contributing, and we wanted to have John spend about 8 minutes telling us about their view on the FinOps world and what they do, and get to know him a little bit better. So John, over to you.
Thank you so much. Definitely appreciate it, and definitely great to meet everyone, to see everyone. So what I thought might be the interesting thing to kind of like talk about is just a little bit of a perspective on how do you operationalize FinOps. Certainly there's a huge amount of work that's gone into figuring out best practices, processes, and such around FinOps and frameworks. But as I think we all know, like where the rubber meets the road is when you actually try to implement this and make it be something that all the different teams are kind of on the same page about. And so I'm sure those of you on the call have dealt with all of the different complexities and aspects of that. And so that was really where I wanted to kind of start off with. And I think the thing about FinOps that I'm sure we're all aware is that with great responsibility comes very few resources. And so I think that's part of the challenge is how do FinOps teams work with all of the other teams that are required for them to be successful. And so that was kind of like where I started. And you can go ahead to the next slide, JR. When we think about like how do we work together with all of the other teams that are responsible for helping us be successful as we try to create a FinOps culture and discipline within an organization, and a little bit tongue in cheek, but I tried to brainstorm a little bit on like what are the different things that people might say if you went to the Cloud Apps teams about what is FinOps. So, one scenario would be, people say, oh, FinOps, that's a FinOps team. I let them deal with it. I don't want to deal with that, right? Another is, yeah, FinOps is just another set of rules I have to follow. I've got this set of things I have to do. It's just yet another thing I have to like pay attention to. It's almost like compliance sort of as a process. Other people would say like, well, it's yet another list of tickets in my long and growing queue of, things that I need to do. And then, there are probably, and hopefully, increasingly, more people who are saying, yeah, FinOps is a shared responsibility that is across, many different functions within the organization, and that is also integrated into what we do. And so I think, JR, were we going to do this as a little bit of a poll?
So we did have a poll. I set it up ahead, and I'm hitting the poll button, and we found that when Zoom gets close to 1,000 people, it sometimes falls over. So the poll button is not responding. So we were going to ask which of these you most resonated with, but you'll have to share your thoughts in Slack. Sorry about that, John.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, I'm sure this is not exhaustive, but I think the point here is that FinOps can be seen by a lot of the people in the organization as yet another thing that they have to do, as opposed to something that is just an integrated part of what they do day to day. And that's really part of our responsibility, is to figure out like how do we make this be something that really is operationalized, so to speak. It's built into what they do. So if you want to kind of go to the next slide. And so really, when I say operationalization, what I really mean is, FinOps is not a one-off project. It's not a reactive, like, gosh, the finance team is really worried about like our ability to predict and manage to budget. FinOps really needs to be that discipline that's embedded in what a bunch of different people across a bunch of different teams do. It's definitely not like, the person who is in the FinOps group coming and looking over someone's shoulder saying like, hey, here's what I need to do today. It's how do we actually make this be something that is embedded in the day-to-day processes across DevOps teams, across SRE teams, across cloud engineering teams, even even to the level of cloud architects, as well as people who are responsible for budget and for that aspects of the business. And so if you can move to the next slide there, JR. So thinking about what operationalization means, at the high level, I think we probably all would agree that there's a number of different components. I tried to identify just a few that we typically have come up in conversations. Certainly, one part of it is a culture. Especially when you talk to developers typically are always focused on how do I get enough resources for my application to make sure that I will never be short of resources. But there's definitely a culture mentality, which is how do I most efficiently accomplish a job that we're looking to enable people to embed as part of their process. Then it goes without saying that visibility and transparency is an important part of that. It's certainly hard for people to align to a process if they're not sure, if they know how it's being measured, or if there's not agreement on the ways we're going to measure what application teams like cost burdens are, so to speak, or what the way is that we're going to allocate different costs and we're going to track those costs. Another key part of this is just making it be part of day-to-day processes. When resources are provisioned, when resources are scaled, when we're trying to figure out like, how we're going to deploy more applications, how do we make the processes that support that be processes that really are, conscious of the FinOps needs and the principles and the cost aspects of that. And then finally, how do we do this in a consistent and governed way, not to prevent being able to customize this based on the needs of different groups, different applications, different business requirements, but how do we do it in a way that doesn't mean that it's, every single team thinks about this differently, implements it differently, and as a result, there's not consistency across the organization, such that it's hard to get like the integrated view of, what are our ROI on these projects and what are the different costs of those projects and how do we allocate those. You can go ahead to the next slide, JR. So at the highest level, there's a set of pieces that we've seen in conversations with organizations that really kind of are critical to making this possible. And certainly like there's lots of details behind this, but following that framework for FinOps, the inform, optimize, operate framework, definitely there are pieces here that are process, there are pieces that are culture, and there are pieces that are tools. And so, that's often the conversation we have is how do we actually think about bringing together those, the culture, the processes, and the tools to support this. And so one part of that is, being able to make sure that people have access and visibility to not just raw data, but also to, the analyzed data that allows us to get on the same page about like where resources are being used and the cost of those resources and the ROI of the use of those resources. And so there definitely are pieces there where tools are really a really important part. And making sure that it's not that, one person over here, they rely on like that spreadsheet that they downloaded from their cloud account. Whereas this other person over here relies on this tool that they went and bought for their group. And like the third person relies on, some cloud management platform. It's definitely trying to figure out like, how do we get people on the same page? And making that transparent so that, everyone from a DevOps engineer to, someone who's on the finance side of things can actually know where they can go to see things in a consistent way. One thing about optimization that I think is, a really important conversation we typically have is that it's very easy for organizations to end up doing optimization as a reactive project based on, some realization that budget and costs are not in alignment. And, I think the mentality that we often end up having conversations about is how do we just make this continuous? Because I definitely have talked to people who did a big optimization project. And so, great, the day after that optimization project, they felt like they were fairly efficient and they were actually driving good return on that investment. But, that drifts every single day after that. So come 6 months later, they might be back in like a very similar boat because there were new projects, there were new demands. And so like, we really spend a lot of time working with organizations on how do we actually make this a continuous process where it's, something that you don't have to come back and do a reactive project in 6 months because you built that into a discipline. And part of that is also just how do you integrate that into the processes? Make it easy to figure out like how do we actually want to think about approvals for use of resources? How do we want to think about policies that can simplify and streamline the way that we actually deploy resources and do so in a way that doesn't slow down the execution that these teams need to have? And then also just the day-to-day operations. Automation is a key part of this. It certainly is the case that we talk to a lot of organizations who are very early in their FinOps journey.
Hold on.
Sorry, John, I'll mute everybody else. Go ahead.
There is. For whom, manual processes are often the rule. And so like, there's a lot of work that, definitely automation can help to take off the plate of what are typically already overburdened teams. Doing that in ways that apply across a lot of the different processes. As we mentioned, provisioning, as we mentioned, how do we figure out utilization? How do we figure out like, resource requests, all of those. And doing it in a way that uses automation to do it just in time. I certainly like, I think we've all seen the different research and statistics talking about how, underutilized resources or wasted resources are a huge cost that organizations are being forced to bear. And so being able to do just-in-time allocation of resources to meet SLAs is a key part of that. So go ahead, JR, next one. So, certainly like at Spot, this is something that we think about a lot from the tool side. We do have a portfolio of technologies. Some of them are, really at the automation level, others are at the visibility level, others are at the governance level, but they really come together to support a lot of these different aspects. So, visibility, like definitely there's a lot of work we've done working closely, with different organizations that many of you are in to figure out like how to make sure that visibility is useful. I think, yet another dashboard is definitely like not a solution. And so we definitely have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out like, how do we make sure that we're giving people visibility in a way that's meaningful to them? Application teams need visibility in a way that aligns to their applications and the resources used to support them. Finance teams need a different type of visibility, and DevOps teams often need to get another type of visibility. How do we provide tools to help give them like that visibility in a unified place so that you have a single source of truth? That's one aspect of what we focused on from the tool side. Definitely, the optimization is a core technology that we developed at Spot. Being able to use purchasing strategies. I heard someone earlier talk about like how to manage, your overall commitment purchasing strategy. That's definitely a lot of the work that we've done is to create technology that can really support that in an automated way, and doing that, in a way that can also, figure out like how do we actually do more than just like purchasing compute, purchasing storage and such, but also intelligently, link together the different pieces of applications to use resources efficiently. Governance is obviously a key part of that. How do we make sure that this isn't just random engineers trying to do their best, but not in a framework that is visible, transparent, reportable? That's a key part of the technology that we provide, and that's really key to making this consistent across groups and different parts of the organization. And then, of course, the automation. Like that's one of the core technologies that we spent a lot of time developing is automation that can take a set of rules and use analytics and intelligence to continually apply those, so that even as applications evolve and use of those applications evolve, there's still a consistent set of things that people are doing in order to be able to like automate that optimization of those. So that's just a really quick overview.
Just coming up on time. I think was that your last slide as well?
Yep.
Perfect.
That is our last slide. Yeah.
Can I ask you
so
what maybe?
Yeah.
Let's go ahead.
Sure.
Maybe an off-the-cuff question.
As well. Yeah. Go ahead.
There'll be a FinOps. Everybody, I think, always looks at all the tooling platforms and they try and figure out like which one does which thing best. Like if you were standing at a booth and somebody said like, what's your specialty sweet spot? Which area would that be?
Yeah, so I think there's really two parts that we really focus on doing in kind of a unique way. And so we focus on basically how do you combine visibility and insight with automation and optimization that is automated. So we actually have like a large set of experience building predictive algorithms and implementing automation that's based on collecting billions of data points from across all the cloud and usage at customers, and using that to really inform how do we automate optimization, but then connecting that to visibility so that you have those two married in a single suite.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, I think Jon is on our Slack as well as some of his team, and they're going to be a FinOps X. And yeah, hope to plug you into more of the working groups in different areas. And thanks a lot, Jon. JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to finops.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.